Cash flow is king. You're proactive in deciding to sell, and sometimes you're reactive.
If revenue's coming down, but cash flow is remaining stable, I see that as you're taking risk off the table.
What we want to look at is cash flow. The revenue could be down, and if the cash flow is stable, that just means your margins improve.
All right, welcome to the first official podcast interview for Thrive Local. Today, I'm joined with a friend, somebody who's actually had a very interesting experience in my life, Hal Feder, who was my business broker with my last business. And I'm just going to do a quick introduction for Hal and bring him on. I'm really excited about this first episode. So today, I'm joined by Hal Feder, a business broker with Murphy Business Sales, and as a global senior leader in the automotive industry with over 3 decades of experience. Hal has his career helping entrepreneurs develop strategies to maximize their business investments. His approach goes beyond traditional consulting, focusing on building strong, long-term partnerships with clients while empowering them to grow personally and professionally. At Murphy Business, Hal leverages his extensive industry knowledge, global network, and expertise in marketing and negotiation to guide business owners through buying, selling, and planning their ventures. And as a trusted advisor, he's known for his personalized service and commitment to delivering real results. I'm excited to have Hal on the podcast. Hal, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Jake. It's great to see you again and reconnect, and I appreciate the kind words. Good to see you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we'll probably weave some of the conversation. We definitely have. We went to battle in 2020 on selling an event lighting design company, and I tell you, there was some moments where I wasn't even sure if it was going to happen or not, because it's you got a special events business and a pandemic. Those two things don't quite mix well together, but
right.
Man, we, with your help and guidance and navigating the process, you made it happen. And, I couldn't be more grateful for your counsel and partnership during that period. So before we get into all that, I do want to kind of start out with just talking a little bit more about you and what you're doing and as a business broker. And really, I know you have a big background in automotive, and kind of maybe sharing a little bit about your origin story and how you got into business brokering.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, those were interesting times for sure, Jake. I was flashing back to a lot of challenges we had. I started with Ford back in 1983. My dad was with Ford Motor Company, so it was kind of grew up in showrooms and service lanes and dealerships, and was in marketing and sales. So I got involved in a lot of transactional deals with Ford, taking one dealer in and taking another out. Toward the end of my Ford career, I was elevated to general management. I ran Ford Fleet. So I got into negotiations with Hertz and Budget and Enterprise and the big rent-a-car companies and the big commercial contracts. Ford moved me to South Africa in 2006, and I became president and CEO of Ford South Africa, which is a life-changing experience. We could do a podcast just on that one, but I got involved in union negotiations, government negotiations in South Africa. Came back, ran sales for a while, and then put dealers into international markets as the export manager. So I did a lot of negotiation, a lot of deal making experience at Ford. Left Ford and went to work for a global trading company in Bangkok, Thailand for a couple of years. Now I'm on the other side of the closing table on the retail side of the automotive business, running a portfolio of automotive franchises for this gentleman in Bangkok, and then left, came back in 2015, and quite honestly failed retirement, to be honest. And then I kind of soul searched for a while, took some time, and I said, what did I really enjoy about working for Ford? And it was helping entrepreneurs develop growth strategies at the time. And now, since I've gotten older and my network's gotten older, now I'm helping people position their business for exit and getting the most return on their hard-earned sweat equity over the years. And I started a business brokering practice about 7 years ago now, and it has grown. And I was lucky enough to come across you, and I always appreciative of your trust and confidence in representing you, because it's something I never take for granted, representing a business owner, because it's probably one of their most valuable assets if you think about it.
Yeah,
I mean, home and the
totally.
car are certainly up there, but a business can be represent a lot of net worth for individuals.
I want to talk about and we had mentioned, we had spoke about this briefly before we hit record, and I think this is an important thing to really discuss that I think a lot of people don't think about when it comes to the exit process, and that is the emotional side of it, and kind of like what goes through the person as they're going through this process of exiting. And of course, we can even speak to some of my story a little bit because it was during a very volatile time. And but I would just be curious to hear from you about um, giving people a little bit of a peek around a corner. It's like it's time to sell your company.
Yeah.
What should you expect mentally and emotionally as a seller when you're going through that process?
Yeah, it's there's definitely a financial component, but there's also an emotional component and a psychological component. And sometimes you're proactive in deciding to sell, and sometimes you're reactive deciding to sell. So if
Mm,
you're proactive, you're retiring or you're relocating, or maybe you're just burned out and want to try something different. There's certain circumstances around that, and then there's reactive. You get a bad medical report, or a partner dies, or you're going through a divorce, or some other life kind of altering trigger event.
yeah.
The situation is very impactful because it affects not only yourself, but it affects your business team, it affects your family, it affects suppliers and vendors, and certainly customers. So I try to be sensitive to all those different stakeholders and competing
Mm,
interest when we start talking about selling the business because we have to make sure we bring them along. And sometimes bringing them along means maintaining confidentiality while
hmm.
we're going through the process. And that's an important element of a business sale. We can talk about that, how we protect confidentiality while we're marketing the business. It's one of the key priorities because we don't want customers or to know necessarily because they'll lose confidence in the business. We don't want the employees to know because they may fear change and
Yep.
exit the business without cause. And we certainly don't want the competition to know because sometimes they use that against the business owner. So confidentiality is important. But you're exactly right. Being sensitive to that life stage change that affects so many people is a big part of selling a business.
Where do you feel like confidentiality? And certainly, I remember going through my exit, having to really be careful and handle all the communication with a lot of care when it came with my staff and all those stakeholders. How transparent should somebody be? Like during is there I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that, like in terms of transparency about the exit. Is there any information that you feel like should be disclosed to those stakeholders during that process, or is it just like let's just keep it completely under wraps until we're ready to announce?
Yeah, it's best to keep it under wraps while we're valuing the business, marketing the business.
Hmm.
We get to a point in the sale where the deal becomes kind of firm. The bank financing is in place, the purchase contract is signed. Obviously, you want to respect your key managers, and you want to reveal that that you're selling the business at the appropriate time ahead of the whole team. It's an individual choice, but the best practice would say that you keep the sale confidential until you get far enough along to where it's a pretty you know you know evident that the sale is going to go through. Because the worst thing that can happen is that you bring them in early, the deal doesn't go through, and now you're picking up the pieces on
Yeah.
a lot of um, you know a lot of information in the market that you really shouldn't have to deal with or want to deal with.
Yeah. Oh, it's certainly a risk. And it's one that, the reputational risk I could see being, one that could really impact operations, valuation. I mean, so many things
Yeah.
that could really put the business at risk. I want to,
Sure.
right now we're talking, and I want to stay on the topic of like the seller, somebody that is selling the business and exiting. Eventually, after we get through this, I want to talk about the buyer. But there's a couple more questions I have for this for that seller that is looking to sell,
Yeah.
and that is positioning. And I know, there's people that are going to be listening to this podcast that are in startup mode. They're just starting a business. And then you're going to have people that are listening that they might actually be at the end. They might be thinking exit strategy and I'm ready to get out of this. And then everybody in between.
Sure.
What are what's some things that people should, I guess, keep in mind in terms of positioning their business for a successful exit? Maybe starting even at the startup process. Is there any considerations there leading up to that point where they're ready to exit?
Yeah, I know it's a great question. I mean, I'll use an analogy. You'd never get on a plane without knowing who or how to land the plane, right? So
Right.
you never want to kick off a business without knowing how you're going to land it down the road.
Yeah.
So succession planning, and most business owners don't do this, right? So
Yeah.
the statistics, depending on what sources you read, between 75 and 85% of business owners don't have or don't do a succession plan. So really, the minute that you start up or the minute that you buy an existing business, you should be thinking about the process of
Mhm.
exit, or at least have a plan to think about the process of exit. Really important. And you always want to gauge, even in the early stages of ownership, what the business is worth, right?
Yeah.
Now it takes some time to get some profitability history and build up a clientele and and develop a management team. But even if you're not in the market to sell, a business valuation is a great tool to have, because it will, first of all, tell you what the business is worth today,
Hmm.
and allow you to work on the kinds of things that need to improve in order to develop a stronger and a higher valuation. So it's a good business planning tool, even if you're not in the market to sell today. and
Gotcha.
and you can just update that, right? So if you do a valuation and it's a number, then of course the broker is going to tell you why it's that number, right? Because he's going to share with you competitive data that
Hmm.
generated the number, and then you can start to work on the things that can improve that over time. And that's a growth strategy for a business owner, whether they're in exit mode or in early stages of ownership.
So is there a I guess maybe a back of the napkin math that somebody could maybe use when they're valuing, or a tool perhaps that you're aware of? It's like, hey, I want to know what my business is worth today. What would be, I guess, the shortest process to get to a number? And
Yeah, I mean,
what's accurate?
there's all kinds of algorithms out there, and you could go into these AI models, and
Right.
my cash flow is this and my revenue is this, and I'm in this category. And you know, I did one the other day just to test it. It came back, your business is worth between 700,000 and 1.5 million. It was like, wow, thanks. That's quite a bit of
Right.
variance.
Yeah.
The short answer is, there really isn't a quick and dirty way. There's so many factors to look at
Hmm.
when valuing the business. There's the cash flow, there's the revenue growth trend, there's the management team, the facility, the location, the category of the
Yeah.
business, the social media reputation of the business, the competitive density. Are there a lot of dry cleaners in your area if you're
Mm.
a dry cleaner? Or if I'm selling a pediatric business right now. There's not a pediatric business around this one, so that's a competitive advantage and adds value to the business, because she's not competing against
Yeah.
another competitor that's close by. Um, Market longevity and tenure. A business that's been around for 30 years, all things being equal, is going to be valued more than a business that's been around 18 months or three
Yeah.
years, because it's gone through the test of the global financial crisis and COVID and all the things that disrupt
Mm.
the business cycle. Owner dependency is a really big one.
Yeah.
A lot of people, a lot of owners are so ingrained and institutionalized into the running of the business that it's hard to separate them from the business when it comes time to exit. So owners really want to watch that and not become too dependent the business results too dependent on the owner
Yeah.
because at the time of sale we'll want to peel the owner away and still have a good business value that remains. So take a vacation. you know take some time as a business owner. Seriously, take some time and prove to yourself that the business can run without you, without your daily involvement, right?
Yeah.
That's hard to do for some folks, but owner dependency is a really key business value driver or a degradation to value driving.
Well, it's almost like, am I buying a job or am I buying a system that produces,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yep.
it's a big
Exactly right.
difference.
It's the difference between a job and a business.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. As far as like selling the business, the only other question I have in that regard is to I guess just to the marketing aspect. And you have this business, whatever, pediatric company, maybe it's an event lighting company like I had, and there's a marketing strategy to be able to find that buyer that is going to be a good fit and qualified to buy the business. Any insight there that you would be willing to share as far as what people need to think about in terms of marketing the business?
Well, the it comes down to developing professional materials that provide enough information about the business to get in front of the right buyer. Okay.
Yep.
So we we do a teaser type ad that puts information out. It doesn't really disclose the name of the business or the exact location of the business, but it gives them enough information to get their interest if in
Yep.
fact they are looking for that type of business. And then and this is where we come into confidentiality. We get an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, personal financial statement, and then an interview with me if I'm representing the business
Mm,
owner to make sure that it's a good fit. If the skills that the prospect bring to the equation make sense,
yeah.
and then you know the business owner and you know the business, or I do if I'm representing it, and I can see if it's a good cultural fit. If you remember when you were selling, we had all three. We had the money, we
Hmm.
had the operational expertise, and there was a good cultural fit for the prospect to
Yep.
your business.
Totally.
So we hit the trifecta there. But materials and then a qualification process to make sure because you really don't want to put the wrong buyer into the wrong business, right? I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
what you're trying to do is develop a win-win intersection of interest between the
Yeah.
buyer and the seller. And as much as I'm representing the seller and they're paying me, I really don't want to do a bad job putting a buyer into a business that I don't think is going to work, even though, we may have a closing.
Yeah.
It won't be a good finish to the movie, so to speak.
I recall a conversation you and I had when we were going through my business sale. And because there was one buyer prospect who wanted to buy the business, and
Right.
we had done some back and forth, and I was like, "Hal, I just don't think this guy's it. I just can't.
True.
I can't leave this business with. He's gonna run it into the ground.
Right.
That's what my belief was, and
Yep.
um, I remember walking away from that. That was like a month before COVID hit, of course, but um,
Right.
hindsight's 2020. But it's you're so right about that, and it kind of ties back into the emotional piece with the stakeholders because you are thinking about who am I leaving this business? I've got this staff that I've built, and
Yeah.
you build these relationships. It's like I want to make sure that I'm leaving, them with the
You
best
bet.
person that I can possibly match up with to take the reins and run this company. Your clients, your vendors, all those people. I mean, you certainly have that emotional connection and vetting through the marketing, and having somebody like you is so critical in the process because you know it protects that confidentiality. In terms of it's like, hey, you're kind of the gatekeeper here, and you're having those conversations, and I couldn't imagine trying to go through the process on my own and selling a business and trying to manage, the emotions and the confidentiality and all these things, you really need to have a broker involved like yourself that can actually, facilitate that. So
Yeah, you want to be able to stand up at the right time and
yeah,
look your employees in the eyes and say, look, um, I vetted a lot of different people to buy this business
yeah,
and pick somebody that is going to be good for you. It's
yeah.
going to be good for the business. And as much as no one likes change, this
Hmm.
change can actually be good for you.
Yeah,
It could be more growth, it could be more compensation, it could be more security
yeah,
because business is being left in good hands. Because no
absolutely.
one wants to grow a business no matter how long they own it and then leave it and have it fail. It's not
Yeah.
a good, it's not, and a lot of these sellers that I'm representing are not moving out of the market, right? So
Hmm.
they're going to be in the grocery store, they're going to be in church, they're going to be wherever, and after they sell the business, they want people to come up to them and say, you know what, we really miss you, but man, you really sold it to a good person. We're grateful that
Yeah.
you sold it to whoever, right? And to your point about brokering, it's people ask me, well, why do I really need a broker? I mean, and I would answer that, there's some things before, during, and after the sale. First of all, just protection of confidentiality
Yeah.
is absolutely key. We've talked about that earlier, but valuing the business properly.
Mm,
Probably 50 to 60,000 businesses for sale on Biz by Sell right now, and only 20% of them will sell. And that's because 80% of them are not valued properly. They're
mm,
overpriced.
yeah.
Okay. Or there's something wrong with the business. So you really want a good value on the business. You don't want to leave any money on the table, but you also have to appreciate that it's got to represent good value to the buyer
Yeah.
ultimately. So marketing, we talked about that earlier. You want professional materials. You want to show the business in the best light. So a broker can help you do that because you haven't done it before, and you want to get the right information out there so that you attract the right buyer. And importantly, you want to remain objective. I mean, sellers are not always the most objective people when they're looking at their business. So
Right.
to have an outside set of eyes, it's valuable. During the sale, it's finding the buyer, it's qualifying the buyer, it's negotiating and helping the buyer develop an offer that the seller will like. And then after it's structuring the deal terms, it's arranging the financing. There's just so many sand traps and brick walls that you can run into on one of these deals.
Yeah.
Having a broker helping you manage the transaction while you can focus on running the business and taking care of your family is a big it's a big deal.
Yeah. No, that's great. There's certainly some bias from the seller about how much your business is worth and how well it runs. And, you're going to, I can imagine like the 80% of overvaluations on the marketplace and issues with the business would make sense. I could see where that would be the fact there.
It,
Uh,
it's the deal killer. It's the deal killer before the deal.
yeah.
If you price it wrong, um, you just you're not you're not gonna end up at the closing table. And what happens is a lot of brokers will put the price that the buyer or the seller wants on the business, and
Mm,
then a year later it's not sold, and then they'll come back to the seller and say, hey, let's lower the price, right? So that's a formula that a lot of brokers will use, but that ultimately it's a waste of the seller's precious
yeah.
time and resources.
So I got another question about this very open-ended and subjective and probably has
Yeah,
1,000 different answers to it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. And that
yeah.
is, when is the right time to sell your business? When do you believe is somebody should go, you know what? I think it's time to go ahead and ride into the sunset and let somebody else take the reins.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of answers, like you said. You really want to sell when the business is performing well, right? You're going
Yeah.
to get the highest valuation when when your revenue curve is in an upward position and your cash flow is you know stable and constant and hopefully growing. The right time to sell, though, is when you're prepared to sell, right? And
Yeah.
I talked about reactive and proactive.
Hmm.
Regardless of the circumstances, you want to be ready to sell the business, okay?
Yeah.
Whether you choose to sell or whether you need to sell. And and that means preparing for the sale before you're ready to sell it, making sure the financial statement is clean,
Mm.
making sure that the ad backs, and we can talk about ad backs, but the things that are on the financial statement that can add to cash flow, the discretionary items that a seller will expend that maybe the next buyer or next owner wouldn't have to expend, making sure your working capital is in good order. I mean, if you've got aged receivables or aged payables, cleaning all that up so that when someone goes through your financial statements, it's a clean and accurate picture and a reflection of the business. If you've got open positions in your management team, fill
Mm.
them. Make sure that, if you've got a key manager that's missing in one part of the business, that all the positions are filled and the business is ready for sale. There's corporate housekeeping items. If you've got an employee handbook, update it. Make sure that your regulatory and your legal positions are in good working order. Have a deal team. You know, talk to a CPA. Understand what your tax implications will be from the sale.
Yeah.
You've heard the old saying, it's not what you sell it for, it's what you take home,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So involve a CPA. I know a lot of sellers are like, oh, I don't want to tell my CPA. The CPA is a trusted advocate, just like the broker is an advocate. So you have to bring an attorney and a CPA into the circle of love, the circle of trust
Yeah.
early, and assemble the right deal teams so that those three, and there's could be others, partners, etc.
Yeah.
Those three are working on behalf of your best interest, and they're advising you early on in the process. Facility, it's a no
Mm.
brainer. In the facility, upgrade if there's a roof leak or there's a door that doesn't shut or whatever, you clean that up and you make sure that there's no operational hiccups in the facility. Importantly, and this is you know think about and have a position on your transition. So some sellers will go to
Mm.
market and say, I want to sell, and I'm going on a cruise the day after closing.
Hmm.
There's those sellers that want to sell but wouldn't really mind sticking around for 6, 8, a year, you know,
Yeah.
during the transition. So have a position it'll be the subject of negotiation. It always is, but have some feel on terms of what your transition timing is. Those are all the things that I would, to answer your question on when it's the right time to sell. When those things are all in order, whether it's a reactive or a proactive reason for selling, you'll be ready to sell.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's a great, I almost feel like that should be a checklist that anytime you're getting ready to go sell, like run through this, make sure that things are cleaned up, you've got your processes dialed in, people are in the right seats, financials are in order, your CPA's involved. I do got a couple questions though, just to clarify on what you just mentioned.
Yeah.
One was you're referencing the trend line in revenue. Is there a certain amount of time that you believe should pass to be able to have like a viable trend line? Is it 2 years, 3 years, or what would be the trend line there
We
that would
we
be viable?
typically look at when we do a recast of the financials, we start to look at the net income and then the add backs.
Yeah.
I can talk to that in a minute. We want to look at, say 3 years of tax returns and then the
Okay.
current year to date financials. So 4 years is probably a good
Yeah.
baseline for that. Anything further out is,
Hmm.
it's a different world, right? COVID or pre-COVID. I mean, people just doesn't, it's irrelevant.
Right.
So when I'm valuing a business today, I'm looking at the 21, the 22, and the 23 tax returns and September year to date P&L and balance sheet.
Gotcha. So I guess if somebody had, just for hypothetical, let's say I've got a business in the past 2 years have actually been down years, like maybe my revenue's trending down.
Yeah.
unless I really want to just get out of the business and I'm just, you know what, I don't care. Maybe I know this is probably going to hurt my valuation, but I'm ready to exit. Um, I would imagine that probably the best course. Would you say the best course of action would be to, you know what, let's try to optimize this and get the revenue turning back around before we start thinking exit? What do you think about that?
Revenue is just one, one metric. What we want to look at is cash flow. The revenue could be down, and if the cash flow is stable, that just means your margins improved, right?
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it's not the end all be all revenue. It's the top line. Obviously, in a growth,
Yeah.
I've sold many businesses for very good value with with a declining revenue, slightly declining revenue. You
Mm.
don't want 30% drop, but let's just say it's down 10 or 15%. I just tell the buyer, look, the seller it's a great business, but the seller's tired. He's stopped investing in
Yeah.
marketing. He's not as aggressive as he was in terms of customer acquisition. He's just working the repeat and the
Yeah.
referral business. So there's so many factors that go into the valuation. I'd hate to leave your viewers with just if the revenue's down, it's
Yeah.
a kiss of death. Not necessarily. Not
Yeah.
necessarily.
Yeah. And that's a great point. And it's, one thing too, it's like if revenue's coming down, but cash flow is remaining stable, I see that as you're taking risk off the table as well, because with
Yeah.
increased revenue comes increased risk to generate that revenue. So you're actually reducing the risk profile of the business while
Yep.
you're improving margins. So just more selling points.
More selling points,
Yeah.
and it is really all about cash flow. There's other things that influence that, and we do look at sales as a percent of revenue
Mm.
uh, on our comps, but cash flow is king. I mean,
Yeah.
cash is king.
Absolutely.
There's lots of other factors as we talked about, but um, I wouldn't say necessarily that if your revenue's down, you're in a bad way. Not
Yeah.
necessarily. Yeah.
So I definitely want to do a part two with you at some point and talk about the buyer. Because
Sure.
I was
Sure.
planning on getting around to this, was like, you know what? We need a whole episode dedicated to just selling a business because it really deserves its own space as we were getting into the conversation. And
Sure.
I really feel like I can just continue to really dive deeper and deeper into this. And there's a lot to selling a business. And, for
Sure.
anybody that is in that position to exit, I highly, I can give Hal my personal endorsement because I've worked with Hal as, to help sell my business. So it's definitely worth it to have a broker. And I appreciate you going through, all the things that people really need to be thinking about when it comes to positioning themselves, the emotional expectations, the stakeholder involvement, confidentiality. I mean, it's really important. And it's a special time in a business owner's life too. It's almost, I can almost put it up there in the same ranks of like getting married or having kids. It's like then you got like your business exit. It's up
Oh,
there as far as
it's huge. It's life
yeah.
changing. There's no doubt about it. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love it. I mean, I sometimes meet with these sellers, and I'm sick of this. I got to get out of this. And the closing will be the happiest day of my life, and then the day of the closing, they're just emotional. They're just
Yeah.
emotional, and sometimes they can't even go out to lunch or dinner with the buyer because they just want to go home and because they're reliving all those
Oh
years
yeah.
and that it takes a while to absorb the magnitude of the sale. So
Yeah.
don't be fooled by, oh, this is just a transaction.
No,
It's never just a transaction.
it is definitely not that. Personal experience, I can tell you, it's definitely not that.
Right. Right.
Well, Hal, to wrap up with the interview, first off, thank you so much again.
Oh, my pleasure.
This has been great. For somebody who wants to get in contact with you, maybe they're thinking about exiting, they got some questions. How can they get in touch?
Well, my website is www.halfeder.com, or you can just call my cell 248-885-7804, or my email, h.feder, Feder, at murphybusiness.com. So I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. I'd love to come back. I thoroughly enjoyed representing you, Jake, and I'm so happy that we were able to be successful.
Yeah.
It was difficult. It was probably because of the economic circumstances, probably one of the more difficult challenges that I've had, but I learned a lot from you. I salute your emotional resilience through the sale, and
Yeah.
you were class act the whole time, despite the
Yeah,
challenges. So,
I
but thanks for
appreciate it.
having me. Thanks for
Yeah,
having me on. I've enjoyed it.
absolutely. Likewise. Well, I'll make sure to link all your contact information in the show
Sure.
notes. So anybody that wants to get in touch with you, check the show notes. Definitely reach out. I know you're on LinkedIn. You're pretty active.
Yeah,
Great place to follow you on social media. And
definitely.
yeah, thanks for showing up and being my first guest. And I think we knocked it out of the park here with a good conversation about selling businesses and all the value that you brought to the conversation. So thanks again. And
You're welcome.
yep.